They say lightning never strikes twice. The sky doesn't care about odds. 6 flights, 6 mornings, evenings, and ordinary goodbyes that turned into something no passenger manifest could prepare for. This is Morbid Circuit. Fasten your seatbelt because for the next few minutes we are not landing until it's over. On March 23, 1994, Aeroflot Flight 593 was cruising toward Hong Kong when the relief captain made an ordinary, fatherly decision, inviting his 2 teenage children into the cockpit to see where he worked. His 15-year-old son was allowed to sit in the captain's seat while the aircraft flew itself on autopilot. No one realized that the boy's hand, resting on the control column, was quietly overpowering the system meant to fly the plane. Piece by piece, the autopilot disengaged. The Airbus rolled into a steep bank, then a near vertical dive. The crew fought to recover, overcorrected, and sent the aircraft into a spin. They caught it once, they lost it again. All 75 people aboard were killed in the mountains of southern Russia. Investigators later found that the most disturbing detail of all, if the pilots had simply released the controls, the autopilot would have saved them.
Helios Airways Flight 522 crashes in Greece.
On the morning of August 14, 2005, a routine maintenance check left one switch in the wrong position. The pressurization system of Helios Airways Flight 522 was set to manual, and no one on the flight deck noticed before takeoff. As the Boeing 737 climbed toward cruising altitude, the cabin never pressurized. Oxygen thinned. One by one, the crew and the passengers slipped into unconsciousness.
20 a.m. At the same time, oxygen masks were deployed inside the cabin. 2 Hellenic Air Force F-16 jets were deployed to establish contact when the aircraft failed to answer calls from Athens ATC. The jets observed at the time the pilot was missing while the first officer was unconscious. At 11:49 a.m., flight attendant Andreas Prodromo broke through the cockpit door and tried to land the plane, but was too late when the engines flamed out due to fuel exhaustion. At 12:04 p.m., the aircraft crash-landed into hills near Grammatico, a village in East Attica, Greece. There were no survivors. It was the deadliest aviation disaster in Greek history, with 121 fatalities, and is the 4th deadliest involving a Boeing.
For more than an hour, the aircraft flew on, deaf to every call from air traffic control, until Greek fighter jets were scrambled to intercept it. What the pilots found through their cockpit windows still unsettles investigators. The first officer slumped motionless at the controls, the captain's seat empty, and rows of passengers who never woke up. A single flight attendant, kept conscious by a personal oxygen supply, reached the cockpit, but far too late. The jet ran out of fuel and went down outside Athens. All 121 people on board were lost.
Pilot and his magnificent crew. That's how British Airways Captain Timothy Lancaster described
June 10, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 had been airborne barely 13 minutes, climbing through 17,000 feet when the cockpit windscreen, held in place by bolts installed slightly too short during overnight maintenance, blew out without warning. The explosive decompression ripped Captain Tim Lancaster from his seat and pulled him head first through the opening, pinning his body against the outside of the fuselage at over 500 miles per hour. Inside the cabin, a flight attendant lunged forward and grabbed his legs, refusing to let go for more than 20 minutes. At freezing, oxygen-starved altitude, the crew held onto their captain while the first officer, alone at the controls, fought to bring the aircraft down safely. Against every possible odd, he landed it. Lancaster survived, frostbitten, fractured but alive. It remains one of aviation's most harrowing displays of human endurance. Now, quick pause before we keep climbing. If this is the kind of story that gets under your skin, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. New dark aviation files drop every week. Drop a comment. Which of these flights so far would you refuse to board? And if you want more real, disturbing footage from the edges of what people have actually witnessed, the rest of this channel is waiting for you. Now, back into the sky, because it only gets worse from here. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 climbs out of Tokyo carrying 524 people. 12 minutes in, a poorly repaired rear pressure bulkhead, damaged years earlier and patched below manufacturer specification, finally gave way. The explosion tore off a section of the tail and severed all 4 hydraulic systems, leaving the pilots with no way to steer the aircraft. What followed was 32 minutes of a fully loaded Boeing 747 lurching and rolling across the sky, its crew fighting with engine thrust alone to keep it airborne, while passengers in the cabin began writing final words to their families. The jet struck a mountain ridge northwest of Tokyo. 524 people did not survive. It remains the deadliest single aircraft disaster in aviation history, and wreckage, along with pieces of those final letters, is still being uncovered in the mountains today.
On a perdu la vitesse, c'est ça? Fais attention.
In the middle of the night on June 1st, 2009, Air France Flight 447 was crossing the Atlantic from Rio de Janeiro to Paris when ice crystals blocked its speed sensors. The autopilot disconnected, handing control to a young co-pilot alone on the flight deck. In the confusion, he pulled back on the controls and kept pulling, sending the aircraft into a stall it would never recover from. A warning voice repeated the same alert more than 70 times as the Airbus fell nose high and engines roaring toward the ocean below. By the time the captain returned to the cockpit, there was nothing left to save. The aircraft struck the Atlantic at over 100 miles an hour, killing all 228 people aboard instantly. The wreckage and the recorders that finally explained those final minutes weren't recovered from 2.5 miles underwater for nearly 2 years. On the night of November 17, 1986, a Japan Airlines cargo flight was crossing the frozen expanse of Alaska when its captain, a 29-year veteran named Kenju Terauchi, spotted two lights pacing his Boeing 747 in perfect formation. Then behind them, something far larger emerged from the darkness, a shape he would later describe as nearly twice the size of an aircraft carrier, holding position no matter how he turned. For close to 30 minutes, the crew tracked it and reported it to air traffic control. Ground radar picked up unexplained returns, and nearby airliner and a military aircraft were diverted to investigate, but by the time they arrived, the sky was empty. The Federal Aviation Administration opened a formal investigation. To this day, officials remain divided. Some point to misidentified planets and lights on the horizon. Others say the case was never fully explained. Either way, 3 experienced crew members swear it was real. They say the truth is out there. Sometimes it's inside the cockpit and no one gets to land and tell it. 6 flights, 6 warnings written in altitude and static. If you made it this far, you already know. The sky remembers everything. Subscribe because the next flight log is already open.